Hello my viewers, and welcome to another video in the 9th Inner Circle. I'm your host, Witty Weasel. If you like my videos, be sure to like it, as well as subscribe to my channel, as I try to post as many videos as I can. I also have a Facebook page, which is in the description. In there, I post some behind the scenes stuff and updates and whatnot. Like, comment, and subscribe if you will. But remember, tread carefully in the 9th Inner Circle. Ghost Bro. My house was built in 1904. It is a single-family home, wood frame setting on a concrete block foundation. I have been living here for about 12 years. Of all the weird things that my siblings and me have seen or heard in this house, this one event is my favorite. This happened to my brother. About 10 years ago, my brother and his best friends had started a garage band playing mostly Spanish rock, alternative music, but in Spanish. His friends could only get together on Sunday afternoons. They would practice into the early evening, and they would usually call it quits by 8 p.m. This was the time I usually showed up and went to bed, because I worked the graveyard shift. This happened in late fall, so the days were getting shorter. They had just finished a long session when the decision to head to someone else's house came about. My brother handed his car keys to his buddy so they could load up the equipment. Everyone had filed out of the basement, but the tricky part was that they needed to walk all the way to the back of the basement, up the back stairs, through the kitchen doorway, down the hall into the living room and out the front porch. Everyone was outside sitting in my brother's truck waiting for him. My brother was walking up the back stairs when he remembered that he had left his pancakes in a to-go container sitting on a speaker in the basement. He made the decision to go back. Now the basement is not clean, with full sight lines. There have been partitions made, and the boiler and the main heating unit are right smack in the middle. So after my brother walks back, he's about to retrieve his food container, when out of the corner of his eye, he sees it. It is a shadowy figure, right at his peripheral vision. This feeling of dread and uneasiness washed over my brother. We had been taught that if you are in the presence of a spirit or ghost and you felt a bad vibe, to say a quick prayer or to cuss at it. My brother chose the second option. He basically just told it, "Hey, screw you, I don't have time for this." My brother started to walk to the back of the basement and briskly up the stairs, closing doors and turning off lights as he is walking out. The last light switch is on the opposite side of the front door. Luckily, the door was open, and the light from the street lamp was flooding the living room with its amber light. My brother said he felt something at his back, but at no point did he turn around. As he flicked the last switch, the living room went dark, as did the rest of the house. As he stepped out, he pulled on the door, closing it behind him. Still holding his food container in one hand, he jogged down the few porch steps. He walked towards the front gate. Our house resides far from the main street, essentially having a large front yard but no rear garage. As he closed the gap between himself and his friend-laden truck, he kinda smiled and thought things were over in his head, mad at himself for spooking out when there was no reason. He climbed into the driver's side of the truck, putting on his seatbelt and getting ready to pull out of the parking spot directly in front of the house, when one of his friends asked, "Hey, wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us?" My brother answered, "What do you mean? He went to work early tonight. He's already gone. Why, do you see his car anywhere?" The next question they asked, "So then who was walking behind you when you were leaving the house?" The Crib Shadow. I was babysitting my niece once while I was staying at my brother's place, and they had the baby camera set up so I could see her on the little TV it came with. I was studying and starting to doze off when I heard some whispering and realized it was coming from the monitor. I initially thought it was some feedback or something, but when I looked at the TV, there was a dark shadow near my niece's crib. I had never been more terrified in my life, but the shadow was clearly there where it had not been before. I ran to my niece's room and looked around and saw nothing, but I took her the heck out of there. I went back to the TV and the shadow was clearly gone. I told my brother what happened, and he pulled me aside and told me not to mention it to my sister-in-law because she'll freak out, but that he had seen that same thing several times now, with the same whispering. They stayed in that house for about 4 more years, and when my niece was just learning to talk, she would tell her mom about her special friend. To this day, it scares the crap out of me. When they moved out, my brother told me my niece had become inconsolably sad because she would miss her friend. Her mom would tell her she could bring him along, but all she would say was that he couldn't leave the house. We have never to this day told her about that dang shadow, and she apparently never saw it. The figure in dark robes. I've told this to a select few, and while creepiest, scariest is subjective in the context of my life, it truly is the creepiest and scariest unsolved mystery. I was a freshman in high school in my hometown of La Crosse, Wisconsin. I was sleeping over at my friend Tom's house. We were watching a movie in his living room when he suddenly got a phone call. I watched as he listened to what was being said on the other line. I watched as emotion poured over his face as he threw the phone across the room. After moments of crying, he told me that a boy at my school had committed suicide. Now I knew this boy only through seeing him in the halls. My friend Tom and I didn't go to the same high school, but Tom had gone to middle school with this boy. Apparently, Tom bullied him during those years. He wasn't proud of it, and to be honest, I was pretty surprised. He was a great guy. He had utter remorse. We decided to sneak out and go for a walk. The year was roughly 1990, maybe 1991. We were freshmen in high school. Now, sneaking out was nothing new. We always did. At the time, we weren't into drugs, alcohol, or partying. We just liked the freedom of walking the streets at night. The discussions were always great. Normally, we'd go walk through the big cemetery that was near my house. It was behind the train tracks that still run through La Crosse to this day. We loved the danger of the cemetery, the scares. We were kids. It was a rite of passage. As we walked along the train tracks leading to the cemetery, we stopped. To this day, I cannot explain why. We had walked into that cemetery dozens of times, and on scarier nights. For whatever reason, we didn't want to go in there. I don't know if the thought of death on our minds, due to my classmate's suicide, was a factor. Perhaps. Regardless, without really saying anything to each other, we stopped, turned around, and decided to head down a nearby street. Now, in retrospect, I do have to say that throughout this walk, things seemed off. There wasn't a car in sight. This was suburbia. Even walking through the town's main street was odd, because there weren't any cars. Odd. It was roughly after midnight. It was a weekend night. Where was everybody? Perhaps just a strange coincidence? Lastly, there was something in the air. Both Tom and I felt it. We even brought it up. It feels weird tonight. The air, the lights. So we decided to walk down a dead-end street. At the end of the street was a ditch with a simple up, down, and up trail that led to the street that I lived on. Simple enough. Now keep in mind, as I get into the horrifying part of this story, that we were in suburbs. These weren't old, creepy houses with strange individuals, and the trees were small. It wasn't a brand new development, but it wasn't that old either. So as Tom and I are walking down this street, we're looking down to the road beneath our feet as we talk. I don't remember the exact conversation at this particular moment. Perhaps we were talking about the tragedy of that night. But it could just have easily been about Star Wars or Akira. But as we approached the dead end, which was a few houses away, Tom and I suddenly stopped. We did so at the time without saying one word to each other. Our heads slowly turned toward each other, both sensing something. The hair on our arms and backs of our necks standing high. Then our gaze slowly moved forward in unison, slightly to the right. That's when we saw it. About 2 houses away, in a virtually barren front yard of a suburban home, beside some bushes, was a dark figure. It was someone or something in dark robes. No face, no features at all, just the robe. Now this figure didn't acknowledge us, not yet. It instead walked or moved in a certain way. I can't articulate it correctly, as if it was walking in circles, slowly, without really walking. It held something that was blowing in the wind, and yes, the wind picked up a little bit as well. Another odd element was the light that illuminated it somewhat. There was a street light a few houses up, but it wasn't strong enough to illuminate this figure as it was. Tom and I were frozen. In fact, I'm almost frozen as I write this. It's been a while since I've thought about this night. So there we stood, frozen in fear, staring at this dark figure moving, yet doing so without moving, and was holding something. Or perhaps what was blowing in the wind was more of its robe. I'm not sure. We stared at this thing for I don't know how long until it stopped. It stopped and suddenly looked up at us, as if finally alarmed by our presence. That was enough for us. We ran away as fast as we could. We cut through a side street that was led to a parallel street towards my neighborhood. This street led to a slight hill. As we rounded the corner and started running up the hill in a panic, but we stopped, because on top of that hill, we saw another dark figure with its arms raised. We turned around and ran away in the direction of Tom's house, which at this distance was at least 5 miles away. We ran, yet time stood still. The next thing I remember, we're lying in the middle of a courtyard of some other neighborhood that we'd never been in, gasping for breath. We sat up, and without saying a word, we walked in silence back to his house. The air felt normal again, although we felt like we were in a haze of sorts, but all out of danger. We fell asleep in his house. I woke up that morning and went home. A few days later, I rode my bike to the location. Perhaps it was shadow play. Perhaps there was a certain tree or bush or maybe a for sale sign or something that made it look like there was something else there. But when we went there, nothing. It was an open yard. Tom and I didn't speak of that night for a long time. Years later, when I brought it up, he replied, "Yeah, what the heck was that?" As if no time had passed. What was it? I have no idea. We hadn't taken any drugs. We hadn't been drinking any alcohol. I often wonder if it could have been a haunting, a specter, a ghost, or whatever. Maybe it was an alien abduction or sighting. We saw no craft, but there was that unexplained light. Or maybe it was some other kids messing with us. How would they have known we were coming? How could they be so prepared? I just don't know. That was roughly 24 years ago, give or take. And yes, this is a true story. Sadly, my best friend Tom passed away a few months ago. I thought of this night during his funeral. I thought of returning to that site. I thought of the odd coincidence of unexplained and surprising death, just like my classmate that night. Is there a connection? Were we seeing some future fate for one of us, which sadly fell upon my best friend Tom? Was this all some dual hallucination in my mind? No way. It haunts me at times, especially at night. The following. My older sister has a ghost that's followed her around for years. I lived with her once for about 3 months, and so much weird stuff happened in that time. All my sister would say to me when I mentioned it was that her ghost didn't like me being here. Things like going to bed with everything locked up and switched off, and waking up in the morning with the back door open, lights on, and the kettle switched on. One night, my sister and I were getting ready to go out, and I asked to borrow her liquid foundation. I used it and put it back where she kept her makeup. 10 minutes later, she's asking me for it, and it's nowhere to be seen. She accused me, of course, of taking it, and made me buy her a new one, and refused to listen to my side of the story. About a year or so later, when she was packing to move to a new house, she found the makeup in a shoebox with some old letters. The shoebox was in a zipped up suitcase that was underneath her bed. But probably the most scared I ever felt was one afternoon when I was the only one in the house, which never happened as 4 other people lived there. I arrived home from work and headed straight to the bathroom. All the doors, windows, etc. were closed. I'm standing in the bathroom and start squeezing a pimple on my chin when a female voice in the hall said, "Stop picking your zits." It was loud enough and sounded real enough, and at the time I thought it was my sister. So I laughed and told her to screw off and asked what she was doing for dinner. No answer. I stuck my head out into the hall. No one there. I searched the house top to bottom, and there was no one home. I sat out in the front porch until someone else got home, because I didn't want to be in there alone. The Rocking Horse. One night, when I was maybe 10 or 12, I had trouble falling asleep. My bedroom was the entire top floor of our house, with my bed and such being on the left side and storage closets, and a play area being on the right. I was lying in bed when I heard a noise from the other side of the room and see a rocking horse beginning to rock. It was sitting just outside one of the storage closet doors. It proceeded to rock its way halfway across the room and stopped dead under the ceiling light. At this point, I was freaking out and just buried my head under my blankets and never peeked out again until morning. It was all confirmed to not be a dream, as the rocking horse was still in the middle of my room when I woke up. Furthermore, I got a stem reprimand from my parents for being up out of bed playing with my toys well past my bedtime. Their bedroom was directly below the storage closet play area, and heard the creaking of the rocking horse shuffling across the room.